Imagine not seeing your mother-in-law for 2 whole years, and the first thing she wants is a one-on-one apology without you. My friend's been dreading this visit, and what she just found out about her MIL's so-called 12-step rules, it changed everything. Stay with me, this one gets real. You know, when you haven't seen someone in 2 years, especially someone who's caused a fair share of emotional chaos, you don't just look forward to a visit, you prepare for it, you brace yourself. That's exactly what my friend did when her mother-in-law said she was coming to town, supposedly as part of her recovery journey. Now, a little background. Her mother-in-law had struggled with addiction for years. It caused tension in the family, led to countless arguments and, eventually, a full-on estrangement. My friend and her husband decided to cut contact, not because they didn't care, but because the damage had piled too high. Lies, manipulation, broken promises, you name it. Then, one day out of the blue, her mother-in-law reached out. She said she was working the 12 steps of recovery and wanted to make amends. A big word that, on paper, sounds healing, but in real life, it can feel more like reopening old wounds. At first, my friend and her husband were cautiously open. They didn't want to shut the door completely. So her husband texted his mum and said, "We'd prefer if you could make your amends over the phone. It's been a long time, and this would help ease the tension." Pretty reasonable, right? But her MIL responded quickly with what sounded like a hard line. "AA requires me to make amends individually. I can't do it with both of you together." She also insisted it had to be FaceTime, not a phone call, because, apparently, that felt more personal. Now, this is where my friend's instincts kicked in. Something about it didn't sit right. She'd already felt anxious about the visit, but now this whole rule started sounding convenient, like maybe the mother-in-law just didn't want to face both of them at once. Maybe she didn't want my friend hearing what she'd say to her husband. So she did what anyone would do. She checked. She went on an AA forum and asked, "Is it true that amends have to be made separately?" The responses? Overwhelmingly no, that's not a rule. It's a personal choice. Some do it privately, some in groups. What matters most is honesty, not format. That changed everything. Now, instead of feeling hopeful, she felt manipulated. Again, this wasn't about healing. It was about control. It was about shifting the power dynamic. And suddenly, the visit she'd been trying to mentally prepare for became something she wanted to avoid entirely. Because, what do you do when someone says they're trying to make peace, but they're already twisting the truth? And more importantly, how do you protect your peace when someone else is using recovery as a way to rewrite their story, while still leaving yours in pieces? Now, here's the thing that really weighs heavy in all of this. Her husband is stuck in the middle. And it's not that he doesn't see what's going on. He does. He knows his mother isn't always honest, and he's seen firsthand how her actions have impacted his wife. But this is still his mom. There's that tug, that voice inside that says, what if she really is trying this time? So when his wife showed him the responses from the AA subreddit, how there's no actual rule saying amends must be made individually, he didn't argue. He just sat there for a second, quiet, processing, and then he said, "I guess she just wanted to control how this would go." It wasn't bitter, just tired, because this wasn't the first time his mother had played with the rules to get her way. She'd done it all his life, bending facts, pushing guilt, always positioning herself as the victim. And now, even wrapped in the language of recovery, it still felt like the same old pattern, just with new vocabulary. But here's where it gets complicated. He still wanted to give her a chance. Not because he was blind to her faults, but because the idea of not giving her one made him feel hollow. He told his wife, "I can't let her back in, but I also can't ignore the fact that she's trying, even if it's messy." That's when his wife said something that really stuck. It's not about her trying, it's about her trying on her terms, without any consideration for how we feel. That's what this moment boiled down to. The mother-in-law wasn't asking what would make them comfortable. She was announcing what she planned to do and daring them to object. It wasn't a dialogue. It was a demand in disguise. And deep down, that realization put the husband in a position no one ever wants to be in. choosing between keeping peace with his wife or risking more pain from his mother. To his credit, he leaned into honesty. He told his mom plainly, "If you can't be flexible about how you make amends, then maybe you're not ready to make them at all." She didn't respond right away. In fact, she waited 2 full days before texting back a simple, "We'll talk when I get there." No apology, no clarification, just more ambiguity. And that, more than anything, left a pit in both their stomachs. Because it confirmed what they feared all along. This wasn't about repairing a relationship. It was about controlling the terms of redemption. And when someone's making amends but refuses to let go of control, well, you can't help but wonder, is it really about healing or just about being heard without having to listen? In the days leading up to the visit, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not a fight, not a sudden decision, just a quiet awareness, especially on her part. The kind that creeps in when your body knows what's coming before your mind fully admits it. She started noticing it in small ways. Her stomach would knot every time her phone buzzed. She found herself tidying rooms that didn't need cleaning, going through drawers, rechecking the guest room sheets. It wasn't about the house. It was about control, trying to hold together a sense of peace when everything felt so unpredictable. The closer they got to the weekend, the clearer it became. She wasn't dreading an apology. She was dreading a performance. Because that's what it had always felt like with her mother-in-law, words dressed up as sincerity, but without the heart behind them. And now, wrapped in the language of step work, it all felt even more hollow, like the same manipulative playbook, just in recovery terms. She knew what her mill wanted, to walk in, deliver a tightly rehearsed apology to each of them individually, and walk out feeling like she'd earned some moral high ground. Like her slate had been wiped clean. No questions, no reflection, just I did my part, now let's move on. But that's not how healing works. That's not how trust is rebuilt. So, instead of waiting passively, she took some time to get clear on her own boundaries. She told her husband, gently but firmly, "If she can't speak to both of us together, I don't want a conversation at all. And more than that, if she turns it into a guilt trip, I will walk away." This wasn't about being unforgiving. It was about protecting herself from disappointment, from gaslighting, from the emotional gymnastics she'd had to do too many times in the past. She even reached out to a friend in Al-Anon, someone who knew the playbook from the other side, and asked, "Is it wrong that I don't want this?" The answer came back clear. No, you don't owe anyone a performance of forgiveness, especially not someone who can't respect how you need to heal. That conversation was a turning point. It reminded her that boundaries aren't a punishment, they're protection. And maybe, just maybe, the mill's amends weren't meant for the people she hurt. Maybe they were just a checkbox, a task, something to get through so she could feel better. But healing isn't a checkbox, and forgiveness, if it comes at all, has to feel safe. So, as the day crept closer, she reminded herself of one thing over and over. You are allowed to not be ready. You are allowed to listen to your gut, to say, "Not like this." Because when someone shows up saying, "I've changed, but won't meet you where you are," you're not the one failing to forgive. There's points the monastrach in the end of mother-in-law. They're the one refusing to grow. The day she arrived, the air in the house was heavy. Not loud, not chaotic, just heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something they didn't actually want to happen. Her husband picked her up from the airport. The drive home was quiet but polite. She made small talk about the weather and the flight snacks, but nothing deeper. That was always her way. Avoid the real stuff until it can't be avoided anymore. When she walked into the house, she gave an awkward hug, stiff and almost performative. Like she wasn't sure if affection was expected or if it would be received. His wife didn't lean in. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They sat down in the living room. She brought gifts, little trinkets she thought might break the ice. A mug that said, "Bless this mess," a candle labelled "Peaceful Moments." Somehow both too much and not enough. Then she cleared her throat. "I was hoping to talk to each of you privately. To make my amends. That's how it's supposed to be done. His wife's stomach tightened. Here it was, the line in the sand. We're not doing separate conversations, she said calmly. This is something we need to hear together. There was a pause, just long enough to feel manipulative. Then the MIL smiled tightly. Well, that's not how the steps work, but okay. I guess we can try it this way, try it this way. Like she was humoring them, like her presence alone was the real gift. She began with her son. I want to apologize for all the times I judged your choices, for not supporting you when you needed it, for maybe being a little too opinionated when you got married. She glanced at her daughter-in-law with a small laugh, like they were sharing a joke. No one laughed back. Then she turned to the wife. And to you? I'm sorry if I ever made you feel unwelcome. I know I was struggling back then, and I didn't always behave like the mother-in-law I wanted to be. I hope we can move past that. It was the kind of apology that sounds sincere if you don't listen too closely, full of soft words that avoid accountability. If I made you feel I was struggling, I didn't behave like I wanted to, not I hurt you, not I crossed a line, not I was wrong. When she finished, she looked at them expectantly, waiting, maybe, for hugs or tears or some grand gesture of forgiveness, but none came. The wife nodded politely. Thank you for saying that, she said, voice even. But inside, something had settled. Not closure, exactly, but clarity. This wasn't healing. This wasn't a breakthrough. It was a checkbox, just like she'd feared. And sometimes, knowing what a person is still unwilling to own tells you everything you need to know. The rest of her visit was tolerable. That's probably the best way to describe it. No dramatic arguments, no huge blow-ups, but also no real connection. They ate dinner together. They exchanged a few polite stories. She tried hard to seem normal, but the truth hung in the room like a low hum. The amends had been made, but nothing actually changed. She didn't bring it up again, either. Not once did she ask, "How did that feel for you?" Or, "Is there anything you need from me now?" It was done, box checked, and that was... When she left, she gave another stiff hug. "Thank you for letting me visit," she said, with a look that almost resembled humility. But it didn't feel earned, just another line, practiced and rehearsed. Once the door closed and the car pulled away, the silence in the house was louder than her presence ever was. His wife turned to him. "So, how do you feel?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Lighter, maybe. But also, kind of numb." She nodded. "Same. I didn't realize how much I wasn't hoping for a miracle. But maybe some honesty would have been nice." That night, they talked more openly than they had in weeks. Not just about his mom, but about boundaries, expectations, what true forgiveness looks like. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting themselves, about moving forward on their own terms. Healing, it turns out, isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stop waiting for someone else to get it. And that's what they did. They didn't block her. They didn't start a feud. But they also didn't pretend things were fine. Her next visit wouldn't be assumed. Calls would be optional. And any relationship, from this point on, would have to be earned, not entitled. Because when someone offers an apology, it's not about the words. They're just the start. What matters is what comes after. And that brings us to you, our listeners. If you've made it this far, thank you. Seriously. These stories aren't always easy to hear, but they matter because they're real, and because so many of us have been there in some way or another. So here's today's question, and it's a simple one. Have you ever received an apology that felt hollow? Just comment yes or no. That's it. No need to share your whole story unless you want to. Just a yes or no. You'd be surprised how many people are quietly nodding along with you right now. And if you feel like someone needs to hear this episode, go ahead and share it. It might be the thing they didn't know they needed today. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, Not every door has to stay open, and not every apology deserves a welcome mat.